The sky above Earth changed on a Tuesday morning in the year 2187. Not slowly, not with any warning, but all at once. A shape came out of the dark between the stars. Enormous, silent, and wrong in the way that only truly massive things can feel wrong to the human eye. It did not arrive the way rockets arrive, with fire and smoke and noise. It did not drift in slowly the way comets drift. It simply appeared the way a bad thought appears the moment before sleep. There, suddenly, with no permission and no apology. It was longer than three of Earth's largest cities placed end to end, dark gray like old cold iron, and covered from one end to the other in towers and ridges and angular structures that no human engineer could name or understand. It moved into orbit just above Earth's moon and stayed there, still, patient, and heavy with a kind of authority that did not need to announce itself. It blocked a wide section of the lunar surface the way a hand blocks the light of a single candle. Every telescope on Earth swung toward it within minutes. Every satellite camera locked on and began flooding ground stations with images. Every military radar system on the planet fired alerts into command centers from Washington to Moscow to Beijing to New Delhi to São Paulo. The alerts were real. The images were real. The object above the moon was real. And it was not anything any human government had built or launched or knew about. Within 6 minutes, the leaders of over 40 nations were on emergency calls. Within 12 minutes, every major military on Earth had moved to its highest alert level. Within 20 minutes, crowds had gathered in the streets of cities across the world. Ordinary people standing together under open skies, staring upward at an atmosphere that looked the same as always but no longer felt safe. And the ship did nothing for 4 full hours. It did not fire weapons. It did not release smaller craft. It did not send any signal. It only remained there above the moon, patient and vast, and let the humans below it panic and argue and stare. Then it spoke. Every screen on Earth was taken over at once. Every television, every phone, every public display board, every monitor in every office and hospital and school and home on the entire planet, all of them cut to the same image at the same moment without asking and without warning. The face that appeared was not human. It was tall and narrow, with 6 small eyes arranged in 2 careful rows, a wide flat mouth set low on the face, and a hard shell of dark amber covering the top of its head like armor that had grown there naturally. It wore deep blue robes trimmed with silver, and it sat behind a long black table in a room that looked official and cold and very, very old. The walls behind it were carved with symbols no human linguist had ever seen. When the creature spoke, the words reached every human ear in their own language, perfect, clean, and completely without warmth. The voice was calm in the way that only absolute power is calm. Species designation, human, it said. Planet, Earth. Our sector, outer fringe. Your civilization has consumed resources beyond your assigned boundary markers, expanded into 3 protected interstellar trade corridors without registration or permission, and conducted unsanctioned faster-than-light travel experiments within restricted galactic space. Under the full authority of Galactic Accord 7 Omega, the Galactic Council hereby requires the following annual tribute. 40% of your planetary energy output, 12% of your biological harvest, and the complete surrender of all faster-than-light research and technology. You have 72 of your hours to confirm compliance. Failure to comply will result in a demonstration of consequences. This communication is now complete. The screens went dark. For a long moment, no one on Earth said a single word. Then everyone said everything at once. The speaker was identified within the hour by Earth's intelligence agencies as High Arbiter Vrethkon, the senior voice of the Galactic Council, a governing body made up of 41 spacefaring civilizations, the youngest of which had been traveling between stars for over 2,000 years. The Council was old. It was powerful, and it was, by all available evidence, completely accustomed to being obeyed. In government chambers and military command centers across Earth, the emergency debates began at full volume and full speed. Generals argued for immediate activation of every defensive weapon Earth had. Strike first, show strength, make the ship above the moon understand that humanity was not easy prey. Diplomats argued for restraint, a calm and carefully worded message that bought time for real negotiation. Scientists argued that no one understood enough about what was being asked, or who was asking it, to make any decision at all yet. And the arguments were loud and passionate and deeply, recognizably human in every way. Nobody could agree. Nobody, that is, except the staff inside a small and largely forgotten government office on the fourth floor of a gray building in Geneva, the United Earth Communication Office, a department so minor and so overlooked that several of the nations currently screaming at each other had stopped funding it 3 years ago and simply never told anyone. In a vote that was messy, procedural, and unintentionally historic, this small office was handed the authority to send humanity's first official response to the Galactic Council, mostly because every other governing body was too deep in argument to notice the vote was happening until it was already done. The senior officer on duty that morning was Commander Alara Voss, 38 years old, former Marine, current senior diplomat, and a woman who had spent the better part of her career sitting in rooms full of people who believed they were the most important person present. She was not loud. She was not the kind of person who made speeches. She was the kind of person who looked at a problem until she understood it, and then acted. She sat down at the console connected to Earth's galactic uplink, a piece of technology humanity had possessed for only 11 years, reverse-engineered from a derelict probe found drifting near Jupiter. She looked at the screen. Her hands did not shake. She typed humanity's official response to the most powerful governing authority in the known galaxy. One word: no. She pressed send, stood up, and walked to the window. Outside, the Geneva sky was gray and heavy with cloud. But somewhere above those clouds, above the atmosphere, above the orbit of the moon, a single small message was moving outward at the speed of light toward a ship so large it had its own weather systems inside its hull. The most ancient power in the galaxy had looked down at a young, rough, stubborn species on the edge of known space and told it to kneel. And that species had looked back at everything being demanded, at everything being threatened, at the full weight of that ancient authority bearing down on it from above. And it had said no, on not, we need more time to consider, not, we respectfully request clarification, not, we are open to a modified arrangement, just no. The Galactic Council had never, in 11,000 years of recorded governance, received the word no from an emerging civilization, not once, not in any language, from any species, at any point in the long and carefully documented history of galactic order. Lesser civilizations begged for extensions. They offered extra tribute. Like they sent long, formal letters full of apology and submission and humble requests for mercy. Sometimes they tried to run, packing themselves onto ships and fleeing toward the outer dark. But even that was not a refusal. It was more of a panic, and it never worked. No was something entirely different. On High Arbiter Vrethkon stood at the center of the Council's command chamber aboard the Herald of the Continuum and read the single human word on the screen in front of him 3 separate times. He read it a 4th time because some part of his mind kept expecting it to change into something more reasonable. It did not change. Around him, the 41 delegates of the Galactic Council sat in their curved rows, and the silence in that chamber was the silence of collective disbelief. Patriarch Un of the Solemnari, the oldest member of the council, sat perfectly still with all 4 of his hands folded in his lap and his wide pale eyes fixed on the screen. The Druvaki delegates, 3 of them, all identical in the way their species always presented itself in formal settings, exchanged a rapid series of clicks that their translation units did not fully convert. The Thesavari representative are a massive aquatic being named Sharel Voss, who traveled everywhere in a sealed, water-filled suit, pressed one large fin gently against the glass of her casing, and said nothing at all. Vrethkon composed himself with the dignity of a being who had governed galactic affairs for over 300 years. Then he ordered the Compliance Enforcer deployed. The Compliance Enforcer was a mid-class council warship, not the largest in the fleet, but more than sufficient for a Class II civilization. Its purpose was simple, and it had served that purpose exactly 117 times in Council history. It would enter the target planet's atmosphere, select an uninhabited landmass. The Council always selected uninhabited locations. This was important. This was civilized. And it would reduce that landmass to glass. Not destroy the planet, just enough to make the lesson very clear. Every species that had ever seen a compliance enforcer do its work had complied immediately afterward. The compliance enforcer dropped out of transit above Earth's upper atmosphere at 3 in the morning, local time, over the southern Pacific Ocean, chosen specifically because it was empty of human population for thousands of kilometers in every direction. It began its descent. It never finished. The first thing that hit it was a kinetic impactor, round fired from an orbital platform that humanity had apparently been calling Watchtower 9. One of a network of 44 such platforms arranged in overlapping coverage bands around the entire planet. The round did not destroy the compliance enforcer, but it hit with enough force to knock the ship sideways and alert every system on board that something unexpected was happening. The second thing was stranger. A gravity well pulse, technology the Council's engineers had not believed any Class II civilization was capable of producing. Locked onto the compliance enforcer's drive core and effectively switched off its ability to move under its own power. The ship hung in Earth's upper atmosphere like a stone that had forgotten how to fall. Then tractor beams came in from 4 separate directions and began slowly and firmly pushing the compliance enforcer back out of Earth's atmosphere, upward, back into open space, back toward the moon. Not destroying it, not damaging it any further, just returning it with steady and unmistakable purpose to where it had come from. The whole process took 11 minutes. In the Council's command chamber, Vrethkon watched the sensor feed in absolute silence. A second message arrived from the Human Communication Office before the compliance enforcer had even fully cleared Earth's atmosphere. Your ship has been returned without further damage. We are not interested in starting a war, and we are not interested in paying tribute. We are interested in speaking with the Galactic Council as equals. You have 72 of your hours to decide if you are interested in that conversation. If you send another ship into our atmosphere without invitation, we will respond differently. This message ends here. No signature, no formal title, no apology, just the words. Ye clean and direct and final. Vrethkon closed the message and turned to face the chamber. Some of the delegates were on their feet. The Druvaki were clicking rapidly and furiously. Several of the elder species representatives were speaking all at once, overlapping each other in formal protests about violated council authority and the unacceptable behavior of a primitive fringe species that had no business possessing gravity well technology in the first place. But not all of them were angry. The Thesavari delegate, Shorel Voss, had not moved. Her fin was still pressed against the glass of her suit, and she was watching the sensor feed from Earth's orbit with those enormous dark eyes. She had been alive for 460 years. She had been a member of the Galactic Council for 230 of those years, not because the Thesavari wanted to be members, but because the alternative had been made very clear to them a long time ago. She knew what it looked like when a species was broken into compliance. She had seen it. She had lived a version of it. What she was watching now did not look like that at all. She watched the compliance enforcer being pushed back into space by a civilization that had possessed faster-than-light travel for 11 years. 11 years. And she thought about the gravity well technology, and the orbital platforms, and the 44 watchtower stations, and the extraordinary fact that humanity had built all of that without any particular reason to expect a threat. They had simply built it. The way other species built homes or roads or walls around their cities, automatically, constantly, because that was what humans apparently did when they looked out at an unknown universe and thought carefully about what might be in it. And then she thought about the response message, not angry, not frightened, not desperate, just clear, direct, certain in the way that only genuinely unbothered things are certain. We are not interested in tribute. We are interested in speaking as equals. Not a threat. More like a fact being stated quietly by someone who had already thought through every available option and was simply reporting their conclusion. Shorel Voss had been sitting in council chambers for over 2 centuries. She had watched species beg and bargain and fold. She had watched the powerful stay powerful and the weak stay weak, and the whole enormous structure of galactic order grind forward the same way it had always ground forward, unchanged, unchangeable. She had stopped believing it could be different. There was only one word in her mind as she watched the sensor feed and listened to the angry voices around her and thought about a small gray planet on the edge of known space that had looked at the full authority of the Galactic Council and said, "No." She had not felt this word in a very long time. The word was hope. Back on Earth, Commander Alara Voss was in a secure conference call with the leaders of 11 nations, all of them asking the same question in 11 different ways. What do we do if they send something bigger? Voss looked at the tactical display in front of her, at the blinking signal of the compliance enforcer drifting back toward the moon, at the 44 watchtower stations sitting steady in their orbits, and at the readiness reports coming in from the defense grid that nobody outside of 3 specific government departments had known about until this morning. The room was quiet. Everyone was waiting. "We do the same thing," she said. "And if that doesn't work," came the voice of a general from the eastern screen. Voss was quiet for exactly 1 second. "Then we get creative," she said. The lore keepers of the Galactic Council had existed for longer than most human civilizations. Their purpose was knowledge, the collection, organization, and careful preservation of information about every species the Council had ever encountered, contacted, absorbed, or destroyed. They maintained records on 4,912 distinct intelligent species across the known galaxy, ranging from thriving interstellar empires to single entries marked simply as extinct. Humanity had an entry. It was embarrassingly short. The original file on the human species had been created 42 years ago, when Earth's first clumsy faster-than-light experiments had registered on Council monitoring systems. The file said, Class 2 emerging civilization, carbon-based biology, single inhabited planet, high rate of internal conflict, estimated time to self-extinction between 40 and 200 years, low priority, no action required. Nobody had updated it since. After the compliance enforcer incident, the High Arbiter Vreth Khan summoned the head lore keeper, an ancient gray-scaled being named Sandalava, and told him that the human file needed to be updated immediately, completely, and thoroughly, and that the full results needed to be presented to the Council within 20 hours. Sandalava worked without stopping. He pulled every piece of data his office had ever passively collected on humanity: intercepted broadcasts, long-range sensor readings, 40 years of mathematical analysis of Earth's resource consumption and territorial expansion. And he assembled a full threat assessment that, when he finished reading it himself, kept him sitting alone in his office for a long time before he was ready to show it to anyone else. The council chamber was completely full when Sandalava stood at the presentation platform. He began with biology. "The human body," he said, are in the flat and careful voice of someone reporting facts they find personally alarming, is, by galactic standards, poorly designed for combat. It heals slowly. It requires large amounts of food and rest. It is highly vulnerable to temperature extremes, and the average human lifespan is remarkably short. And yet, human pain tolerance and functional capacity under injury is among the highest of any known species in our entire database. Humans can continue to fight, to think, and to act in physical conditions that would cause complete behavioral shutdown in most other known intelligent species. This is not a trained military response. This appears to be a standard biological feature of the species. Several delegates shifted in their seats. Sandalava moved on. "Human psychology presents a further anomaly," he said, "which our models have significant difficulty explaining. The human species has engaged in 437 documented large-scale internal conflicts over the course of its recorded history, more internal warfare than any other species in our records. And yet after every single one of these conflicts, without exception, the human species emerged more technologically advanced than it was before the conflict began. It is the only known species for which internal war appears to function as a driver of accelerated development rather than a cause of decline. They fight themselves constantly, and each time they do, they come out faster and stronger on the other side." The clicking from the Druvaki section grew louder. "Furthermore," Sandalava continued, human civilizations demonstrate a highly specific behavioral response when faced with a common external threat. When humans identify a shared enemy, all internal divisions collapse with remarkable speed. Factions that have been in active conflict with each other for decades will form functioning alliances within days. The Council's tribute demand was delivered 48 hours ago. In that time, 14 separate human governments that were in active political or economic conflict with each other have already signed 3 mutual defense agreements. It should be clearly understood. Humanity was not unified before we contacted them. We have unified them. The chamber was very quiet. Sandolava paused and let that silence remain for a moment before he moved to the technology section. The gravity well disruptor technology used against the compliance enforcer was reverse engineered by human scientists from a derelict probe recovered in the year 2091, he said. That probe, according to our records, belonged to the Veth civilization. The Council will recall that the Veth were a Class 3 species processed for non-compliance approximately 90 years ago. Humanity found the wreckage of a Council enforcement action, recovered it, studied it, and built a functioning version of one of its core propulsion systems in under a century. With no formal scientific exchange, no guidance, no original schematics. Only wreckage and their own curiosity. Old Patriarch Uun of the Solemnari, the oldest living member of the Council, made a quiet sound that was not quite a word and not quite anything else. Additionally, Sandolava said, current intelligence indicates that in the 96 hours since the tribute demand was issued, before the Council has even responded to their countermessage, human research teams have already begun design work on a second-generation faster-than-light system that early projections suggest will be 30% more efficient than their current model. They appear to have accelerated their own research in direct response to being told to surrender it. This behavior is consistent with documented patterns across many areas of human history. Telling a human not to do something appears, in a significant number of recorded cases, to make that human do the thing faster. Several delegates looked at each other. Sandolava set down his notes and looked out at the chamber. There is one final item, he said, and I want to be precise about how I present it. The human defense network that intercepted the compliance enforcer was not built in response to our arrival. It was already in place. It has been in place and steadily expanding for over 40 years. Humanity built that network before they knew we existed. They built it because they assumed that if the galaxy was full of intelligent life, some of that life would eventually arrive with bad intentions. They prepared for a threat before they had any evidence of one, not because they had specific information, but because preparing for the worst appears to be something humans do by instinct, in the same way that other species sleep or breathe or eat. The chamber was silent. Nobody spoke for a long time. It was Patriarch Uun who finally broke the quiet, and he was ancient enough to remember the last 3 species that had surprised the Council, and he had watched all 3 of them be crushed. He was, of all the beings in that chamber, the one most likely to understand what he was looking at. He spoke very slowly. We made a serious error in our initial assessment of this species, he said. We looked at their age and their conflicts and their small single planet on the fringe of known space, and we saw something young and weak and ready to be shaped. We did not look carefully enough. We assumed that what was young was also simple. We did not ask what they had been doing in all those years of fighting themselves and burying their dead and rebuilding from nothing over and over again. We did not ask what something becomes when it has been forced to survive that many times. He paused. We have not poked a primitive civilization, he said quietly. We have disturbed something that has been sharpening itself for a very long time, and it has only now opened one eye. Vrethkon said nothing, but he did not argue either. And in her sealed water suit at the far end of the chamber, Voss heard the old patriarch's words and felt something settle into place in her chest. Something she had not felt in a long time and had almost stopped believing was real. She pressed her fin against the glass and watched the room change around her. It was, she thought, the beginning of something. Station Threshold did not look like a diplomatic venue. It looked like what it was, a structure humanity had designed, built, and launched into space in the 11 days between the Council's tribute demand and the opening of formal talks. Where it had been assembled from prefabricated components in a construction timeline that the Council's engineering analysts had quietly flagged as not possible for a Class 2 civilization before being told to re-examine their assumptions. It was not beautiful. It was angular and practical and put together with the kind of confident urgency that comes from a species that has decided something is going to get done and is not particularly interested in perfection when function will serve just as well. But it was solid. The structural readings the Council's advance team had taken before agreeing to attend were good, better than good, and the life support systems were stable and efficient in a way that required no modification for any of the 7 species attending the talks. Commander Alara Voss arrived first. She came with a team of 4, a translator, a scientific advisor, a legal analyst, and a young communications officer named Thomas Reyes, who had the specific and unusual skill of remaining completely calm in situations that were objectively terrifying. Voss had selected him for exactly that reason. The council delegation arrived 20 minutes later, and they filled the room differently than the humans did. They were larger, most of them, and older in the way that species get old when they have been watching the galaxy for thousands of years. For they arranged themselves around the long central table with the practiced ease of beings who had done this in many rooms across many centuries. Vrethkon sat at the center of the council side. He looked, Voss thought, like someone who had not slept well and did not intend to show it. The talks were supposed to begin with a formal statement of terms from the council side. A restated version of the original tribute demand with minor modifications designed to look like flexibility while changing nothing essential. Vrethkon had prepared this statement carefully and fully intended to deliver it. He did not get the chance. Voss spoke first. She spoke calmly and without raising her voice, and she did not use any formal preamble or greeting. And she did not acknowledge the council's seniority or their authority, and she did not apologize for any of the events of the previous 11 days. She simply began speaking as though the conversation was already underway, which in a sense it was. Before we discuss what the council wants from humanity, she said, Mama, I want to discuss something that was brought to my attention recently. Something I think the full council should hear. She reached into the case beside her and placed a small data chip on the center of the table. It was a simple thing, small and gray, not impressive in any way. But the moment it touched the table surface, Shorel Voss, the Thessavari delegate, went completely still inside her water-filled suit. Because she recognized it. She had passed it to Voss during a brief private conversation in the corridor outside the meeting room, 20 minutes before the talks began. A conversation that had lasted less than 3 minutes and had changed the shape of everything that followed. This chip, Voss said, contains the names and full records of 15 species currently represented at this table or within this council. Species that did not join the council freely. Species that were given the same choice humanity was given, and that made a different decision, not because they wanted to, but because at the time they were alone and there was no one to stand with them. They said yes when they meant no, and they have been saying yes ever since. The chamber went very still. Vreth Khan's 6 eyes fixed on the data chip with an expression that was not quite readable to the human faces in the room, but was perfectly readable to every non-human face present. I am not placing this here as an accusation, Voss continued. I am placing it here as context, because humanity does not want to leave the Galactic Council. We want to join it. But we want to join a Galactic Council that is worth joining. What we are proposing today is not a negotiation about the size of our tribute payment. It is a conversation about restructuring, open representation for all member species, a mutual defense charter, and the complete abolition of the tribute system. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the room erupted. 3 of the elder species delegates were on their feet, speaking over each other in rapid and furious tones that their translation units struggled to keep pace with. The tribute system was the foundation of galactic order. It had existed for thousands of years. It was not open to renegotiation by a species that had been in space for 11 years. The violation of protocol was extraordinary. The impudence of placing an unauthorized data chip on a council negotiating table was extraordinary. Everything about this situation was extraordinary, and none of it was acceptable. But something else was also happening on the other side of the table. The Thessavari delegate had placed her fin against her suit's glass casing, her signal that she wished to speak, and she was not the only one. The Korveth delegate, a quiet species from the inner sectors that had spoken fewer than 40 words in 300 years of council membership, had raised a hand. The representative of the Mirel, and a species that had joined the council after a demonstration of consequences 2,000 years ago, was sitting up straighter than anyone in that room had ever seen him sit. And the delegate from the Harixo, a small insectoid civilization that usually voted in perfect alignment with the Druvaki, had pushed his chair back slightly from the elder species side of the table. Not much, just slightly. But it was enough to notice. Vrethkon called for order. He got enough of it to continue. He turned to Voss with the carefully controlled expression of someone who has realized the ground beneath them has shifted and is still deciding how to respond. "You are proposing," he said slowly, "to restructure an institution that has governed this galaxy for 11,000 years, based on the wishes of a species that learned interstellar travel from a piece of salvage 11 years ago." "I am proposing," Voss said, without missing a beat, that you read the names on that chip, and then ask the delegates from those species whether the institution that governs them does so with their consent." Vrethkan did not reach for the chip. But 3 other delegates did. The room changed as they read, slowly, the way rooms change when something true is being read aloud in a place where truth has been carefully kept out for a long time. It was not dramatic. It was quiet, and it was real, and it could not be undone. Voss reached into her case one more time and placed a second document on the table. A mutual defense treaty, 4 pages long, already signed by the Thesavari, the Corveth, the Morel, and one other species whose signature made 2 of the elder delegates go very quiet and very still. "We are not alone in this," Voss said quietly. She did not raise her voice. She did not pound the table. She simply sat there and let the document speak for itself. This treaty between species that had been silent for generations, signed in the 11 days since a single human word had shown them that saying no was something you could survive. Vrethkon looked at the document for a long time. Outside the viewport of Station Threshold, the stars were cold and steady and unchanging. Inside the room, for the first time in 3,000 years, something had changed. The talks went on for 6 more hours, and when they finally adjourned for the evening, Thomas Reyes walked up beside Voss and said, very quietly, "Do you think it worked?" Voss looked at the empty table where the data chip still sat, and the treaty still lay. "It already has," she said. The full Armada had never been used. Not once in 11,000 years of Council history had any situation ever required it. Or rather, no situation had ever been allowed to reach the point where it was required. The threat of the full Armada had always been the weapon. The knowledge that it existed, that it was ready, that it was larger than any fleet any single species could assemble. That knowledge alone had always been sufficient. 3 of the Elder Council species, the Druvaki, the Kethsolar, and the Orvanai, had decided that knowledge was no longer sufficient. They had not informed the full council before acting, that they had simply given the order. The full Armada moved toward Earth's solar system through transit space in the early hours of a morning that no one on Earth was sleeping through. Because Earth's long-range sensor network, the same quiet system that had been running without interruption for 40 years, had detected the transit signatures 40 minutes before the fleet arrived and had already sent alerts to every government on the planet simultaneously. When the full Armada dropped out of transit at the edge of Earth's solar system, what it found waiting for it was not what it expected. It expected Earth's planetary defense grid. It expected the watchtower platforms and the kinetic impactors and the gravity well disruptors. These were known quantities now, cataloged and assessed. And while they were deeply impressive for a Class II civilization, they were not, on their own, a match for a fleet of this size. On what the full Armada did not expect was the other fleet. They came from 11 different directions at once, dropping out of transit in coordinated sequence with the kind of timing that takes practice to achieve, and 9 days of very intense planning to pull off. Thesavari water ships arrived first, their hulls gleaming dark blue against the black of space. Corveth lattice cruisers followed, angular and strange, built by a species that thought about space travel in ways no other civilization had ever quite replicated. Then came the Morel formation clusters. Dozens of small fast ships moving together in patterns so complex and fluid, they looked less like a fleet and more like a single living thing that breathed and shifted and turned in one motion. Then 8 more species, 8 more kinds of ships, all of them different, none of them matching. On flying in no particular formation because they had had 9 days to plan and had not managed to agree on formations in 9 days, but they were all flying in the same direction, toward the same point in space, for the same reason. The full Armada stopped. This was something the full Armada had never had to do before. Stop, and assess, and recalculate. Its commanders ran projections and ran them again, and arrived at conclusions they did not enjoy. So the combined Allied fleet was not larger than the Armada. It was not more advanced in every area. In a straight fight with everything equal, the full Armada would very likely still win. But the cost would be enormous and messy, and the outcome was no longer the clean certainty it had been when they set out. Then something happened that no Armada commander had factored into any projection. 3 ships inside the full Armada itself broke formation, then 7 more, then 20. They were Thesavari ships. Vessels crewed by beings whose species was a council member, not by choice but by submission, whose grandparents had been alive when the council made its original demonstration of consequences against the Thesavari homeworld, who had watched the events of the past 11 days with a feeling they had almost forgotten they were capable of having. Hope. They were not attacking anyone. They were not defecting to the Allied fleet, or they were simply stopping, holding their position in open space, refusing to move forward. And in doing so, they were saying, without a single spoken word, exactly what they thought of this mission and exactly what they thought of the order that had sent them on it. Then, more ships broke formation. Corvette ships whose crews had been updated in real time on every development at station threshold. Morel ships whose commanders had read the full text of the Mutual Defense Treaty and thought about it carefully. Small independent vessels from 4 other species that technically owed the Council military service under their membership agreements, but that had their own quiet thoughts about what they were willing to do on behalf of a governing structure whose legitimacy was currently being debated openly for the first time in 3,000 years. The full Armada did not fire a single shot. It stood down. Not with a formal announcement, not with a ceremony or a declaration or a document signed by anyone. It simply stopped moving forward, and then gradually, ship by ship and section by section, it began to turn back. And the sight of that enormous fleet turning in the dark between the stars was something that would be described in the histories of a dozen different species for centuries afterward, each one in their own language, or each one trying to find the right words for what it meant when the most powerful weapon in the galaxy decided not to be used. Back at station threshold, the news arrived during a recess in the talks. The room found out in different ways. Some delegates received signals from their home governments, some from their military contacts. Some simply saw it on the sensor feeds running on the secondary screen in the corner of the meeting room. The reactions varied enormously. Or some of the elder species delegates were furious. This was a violation, this was unauthorized, this would be formally addressed and there would be consequences. Some sat in silence in ways that were harder to read. Some, mostly from the smaller and younger member species, were making sounds that their translation units rendered as something between relief and pure disbelief. Voss was told by Thomas Reyes, who came up behind her during the recess and said, "You," in a voice that was working very hard to stay level. "The Armada turned back, Commander." She nodded once. She did not celebrate. She kept her face level and her posture straight, and when the recess ended, she went back to the table and kept working. Because there was still a very large amount of work left to do, and celebration was something for after. The vote on the founding charter of the Galactic Assembly took place 6 weeks later. It was not unanimous. 3 of the elder species abstained rather than vote against, which was a political calculation rather than a principled position, and everyone in the room understood the difference. 1 species voted against and then had to be reminded, in a calm and factual conversation, of the Mutual Defense Treaty and what its terms meant in practical terms. That species changed its position. The charter passed. The tribute system was abolished. Your representation in the assembly was restructured on the basis of 1 primary vote per member species, with a rotating advisory council drawn from across the full membership. An independent arbitration body was established with judges selected from 12 different species, no 2 from the same world. The elder species retained their seats and their significant influence. That was the compromise, and it was an imperfect one. And everyone at the table knew it and said so. But they no longer held dominion, and the difference between influence and dominion was a difference that mattered enormously to 15 species whose names had been written on a small gray data chip carried into a meeting room on a station that had not existed 3 weeks earlier. There were celebrations on Earth. They were large and loud and deeply, recognizably human in every way. Parades and music and speeches from people who had not been involved in any of the key decisions but were very enthusiastic about them now. There was also grief, quiet grief, in some homes and some hospitals, for the people who had not come back from the brief orbital engagements of the previous weeks, for the pilots and crews of ships that had been damaged in the response to the compliance enforcer, for the ordinary soldiers who had done their jobs in the dark of space where nobody could see them and whose names would not be in most of the speeches. Humans celebrated loudly, and they grieved quietly, and they held both things at once, because they had always been a species that understood how joy and loss could occupy the same moment without canceling each other out. Commander Alara Voss was not at any of the celebrations. She was at Station Threshold, which had been designated the temporary seat of the new Galactic Assembly while a permanent location was negotiated. She was working. There was always more work. And when she finally stopped late one evening, she stood at the viewport in her small office and looked out at the stars. Thomas Reyes was still at his desk in the outer room, and he looked up and saw her standing there. And because he was 26 years old and had survived the most extraordinary 11 weeks in the history of the known galaxy and had not yet learned to stop asking the obvious question, he asked it. "What are you thinking about, Commander?" Voss looked at the stars. She was thinking about one word and what it had cost, and what it had opened, and how strange it was that a species which had spent most of its long and difficult history struggling to get along with itself had found, when the oldest power in the galaxy looked down from above and said, "Submit." That the one thing every human on Earth could agree on without argument was a single quiet refusal. She was thinking that this was not an ending, or a new galactic order was an enormous and complicated and deeply unfinished thing, full of old grudges and new alliances that had not yet been tested, and species that were free for the first time in centuries and did not yet know what to do with that freedom. It would take generations. It would be hard. It would sometimes go wrong in ways no one had planned for. She thought all of this. She said none of it. She turned away from the viewport and picked up the next file on her desk. "What's next?" she said. Not a question. A statement. Outside the viewport, the stars did not change. They never did. They just hung there in the dark, cold and patient and ancient, the same way they had hung there before humans ever looked up at them and decided, with characteristic stubbornness, to go. But something had changed among them, quietly, permanently, in the way that real change always works. Not all at once, not with a single dramatic moment, but one word at a time. Spoken by someone with steady hands who looked at the weight of the whole universe pressing down and decided simply and without hesitation that the answer was no.